Hey, Pusher Panthers. So here we go, beginning with our year-long journey through American history. So today, we're going to talk about America, the early years. Question mark to 1500. So we're just going to run through tens of thousands of years of American history here very, very quickly. We have a question mark at the beginning because we don't really know when the first people showed up in what would become the United States and what will become eventually North America. We really don't know. We have some guesses, but we really don't know. And then we'll end right around 1500 when all kinds of people begin showing up. So, first off, how did people get here? Well, there's not any agreement on this either because we don't have any written record. Some people believe, some historians and anthropologists believe that the first humans arrived in what would become North America in boats coming across the Pacific Ocean from places in Asia and places like that. We don't really know. The most prevailing, the most popular belief is that early humans came across this what's known as the Bering Land Bridge, which comes from Asia, Siberia, and comes into North America. If you look at a current map of the world, you will see coming off the coast of Alaska is this chain of islands, the Aleutian Islands, and they go out into the Bering Sea and go almost all the way over to Russia and northeastern China. The belief is that during the Ice Age, when we have glaciers all over the world and the sea levels around the world have dropped because the oceans and the seas have turned into ice, that it exposes this land bridge coming from northeastern Asia, connecting it to North America. And around 30,000 years ago, early humans, following games, woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and that sort of thing, followed the game across this land bridge and began coming into what would become North America, coming into Alaska and northern Canada. And then we have global warming. The Earth begins to warm up. As it begins to warm up, these glaciers begin to melt. As they melt, the sea levels rise, the ocean levels rise. And when they rise, they cover up this land bridge that had been exposed. The land bridge now is underwater and it traps these early people that have come into what will become eventually North America. It traps the game here, traps these early humans here. As these glaciers begin to recede across the landmass, the people, these early humans, begin making their way further west and further south through the continent, coming down the coastline and into Canada and into eventually the United States, as the more and more land is exposed by these receding glaciers. Now, eventually, these early humans begin to break off from one another and begin to settle in different areas of this new land. And as they begin to separate from one another and begin to settle into these different areas, they begin to adapt to their environment there, change the way they live and do things in accordance with the environment. They begin to develop their own languages and their own cultures over time. And what happens because of this is the beginning of the American Indian tribes that begin to populate across North America. This is where we get all of these Indian tribes that eventually will be found once again when the Europeans begin showing up. So this is how these Indian tribes begin to develop. Now, the earliest known settlement is from about 28,000 years ago. Okay. Now we know humans were here before 28,000 years ago. We know that because we found footprints and other evidence of human interaction well before 28,000 years. This is the first settlement, meaning that these are people who stayed in one place either for a very long period of time or at least for a short period of time, that they built some permanent structures there. So um, these are not nomadic hunters, or they're semi-nomadic people that sometimes they move and sometimes they stay in the same place. So the earliest settlement where people settled down and built some sort of permanent structures is from about 28,000 years ago, and it's known as the Clovis people. Now, if I asked you, where do you think this settlement is? Most people, and you probably as well, would say probably up in Alaska up here or along the western coast, maybe Washington, western coast of Canada, maybe down into California. Oh, nay, nay, you would be wrong. This settlement is found in Chaco Canyon in present day New Mexico. So it's actually down in here, which is crazy. Now, this is, again, the earliest known settlement. It's from about 28,000 years ago. That could change. This is one of the frustrating, one of the amazing, one of the exciting things about history and anthropology is that as new discoveries are made, it changes our story. But as of right now, this is the oldest known settlement from 28,000 years ago in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Maybe at some point in time, they'll find a settlement that's even older than that predates that, maybe in Canada or along the western coast. But right now, the oldest settlement that we know of is in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. And so for the next 25,000 people, or next 25,000 years, these early humans will live in North and Central and South America, relatively unknown to the rest of the world. They don't know anything about the rest of the world, and the rest of the world knows nothing about them for the next 25,000 years. So our first European contact. The first account that we can find of any European contact with any land west of Europe comes from the 5th century, when an Irish monk claims that he got into a boat and sailed west out into the Atlantic Ocean, and he finds this huge landmass out in the middle of the ocean there. Now, most people don't take this monk very serious, because this monk also tells people that he spoke with talking whales along the way and all these other fantastical creatures. And most people just like, I don't think so. It was just, I don't know, some drunken Irish monk. You sure to say that? I was in my boat and I was heading west across the ocean. And I saw a talking whale and he took me to this giant landmass. It was crazy, I'm telling you. Get me another whiskey and I'll tell you some more. And most people just, I don't think that's really true. So most people didn't pay any attention to him. But it is the earliest account that we have written in European literature, written down in Europe, of anyone finding land west of Europe. But again, most people didn't take him very serious. This guy is the first verifiable European contact. He's a Viking. And it's in 984. Eric the Red, this fine looking, intense Viking there, he's living in Iceland and he sails west and he finds this giant landmass out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that nobody in Europe ever knew was there. Now, Eric the Red calls it Greenland. And this is kind of an inside joke. This is a big practical joke that Eric the Red is playing on the Viking people. Eric the Red believes that too many people live in his homeland of Iceland. So he wants to get rid of them. So he finds this landmass and he calls it Greenland. So it sounds really nice. Oh, it's nice and lush and green, and the weather is perfect. And oh, it is so much better than living in this awful place of Iceland. Truth of the matter is, Greenland is further north than Iceland, and it's a pretty desolate, pretty cold, pretty awful place to live. But Eric the Red wants people to leave his home country and move to Greenland, so he'll have more room and more space. So he calls it Greenland, and people do move there. There are some people that move there and set up some settlements and establish a permanent resident there. Now, Greenland is part of North America. It is the most northeastern part of North America. And this is the first European contact with what will become North America. Later on, Eric the Red's son, this guy here, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, Eric's son of Eric. Around 1000, Leif Erikson leaves Iceland, and he goes even further west past Greenland, and he establishes the first European settlement on what will become the North American mainland. And it's along the eastern shore of present-day Canada. Now, Vikings are not very original people. They have very basic, very boring names for places. Iceland, Greenland. So Eric the Red is going to call this new land that he's found further west, he's going to call it New Found Land, Newfoundland. And he actually sets up a Viking settlement on this territory. Now, Vikings do go there, and it is a fairly thriving community. 150 or so Vikings end up going there, and they stay there for about 15 years. And then eventually the Vikings all leave because of the ferocity and the awfulness, I guess you could say, of the American Indians in the area. The American Indians, Native Americans in that area, were not real happy with the Vikings being there and kept attacking their settlement and killing them off and so on and so forth. And so the Vikings left because of how mean the American Indians were in Newfoundland. How bad do you have to be that you scare off a bunch of Vikings? Vikings were pretty scary people themselves, and they get driven off by American Indians. From this point forward, America is forgotten. The Americas, North and South America, are going to be completely lost to history. Right around this time, Europe begins to go into the Dark Ages, and a lot of knowledge and a lot of technology is lost during this time. And it's a time of a lot of superstition in Europe, as you know. Most people don't ever go beyond 10 miles, 10 miles of where they were born. And Europe becomes very, very isolated. And so all of this stuff that the Vikings have found, and then the Vikings have definitely found North America. There is evidence that Viking ships actually came up to Mississippi. We have Viking carvings and rocks along the Mississippi River. And so the Americas will be lost as Europe plunges into the Dark Ages for the next 400 years. And then things change. 1490s, Europe is just coming out of the Middle Ages, and we're going into a period known as the Renaissance. And so there's this explosion of philosophy. There's a tremendous output all of a sudden of art in painting and in sculpture and in music. And Europe is becoming very, very fascinated with the world around itself again. And Europe is becoming very, very, I guess you could say, modernized. They're coming out of the Dark Ages, and they're becoming the centerpiece of the world at this time of intellect and of science and so on and so forth. And Europe becomes very interested in the world around it. And European countries begin making contact with places all over the world that they had never done before for trade and for power. With trade, the more you trade, the more powerful you get. The more powerful you get, the more trade you make. So they're traveling all over the world, particularly with India and China. India and China were the crown jewels. These were the places that every European country wanted to go because they had lots of spices and they had lots of gold and they had silk and all this new stuff that Europe was very interested in and they were bringing back and introducing into European society. So Europe really wanted to trade with them. Now, many of the great explorers, almost every great explorer that you can think of at this time all came from present-day Italy. However, if you look at Italy, it doesn't exist at this time, right? Here's Italy here, and you can see there's no Italy. It's this collection of these city-states and small kingdoms and so on and so forth. Because Italy is so broken up, none of these places have any money, with the exception of maybe the Papal States right here in central Italy. The rest of Italy is extraordinarily poor, and they can't finance these trips to go trade. But the people that grew up there, they grew up on the ocean, right? On one side, they've got the Mediterranean Sea. On the other side, they've got the Adriatic Ocean or the Adriatic Sea. So these are people that spend their entire lives growing up on the water, and they become very, very good, very, very good at sailing ships and so on and so forth. But they can't go out and explore because there's nobody in Italy to pay for this. So these seafarers these Italian seafarers begin to hire themselves out to these countries that are actively exploring the world: France and England. The Dutch at this time are financing a lot of these trips around the world, and so they go and hire themselves out to all of these countries that are actively exploring. The most famous of these seafarers, of course, is Christopher Columbus. He's an Italian. He can't sail for Italy because there is no Italy. So Columbus wants to do something crazy, revolutionary. He wants to establish a new trade route to India. Okay, now everybody wants to go to India, and at that time there were only two ways to get to India. So here's our handy dandy map. Right, here's India. I know it's very blurry, but here's India here. In the 1500s, late 1400s, and the early 1500s, there were two ways to get to India or China. You could go overland into these places. You could walk there from Western Europe through Eastern Europe, through Central Asia, into India and China. A couple of problems with this. One, it was super expensive, super duper expensive. Two, it took a really long time. And three, it was really dangerous because as you're walking along here, you have to deal with the weather. It can get very, very cold. It can get very, very hot in all of these places. You have to go over some mountain passes, which is very difficult. It was not like the mountain passes that we have today. You would literally have to climb over the mountains. And then on top of that, there's all kinds of people in between here that really don't like you. And they rob you and they kill you and they take you hostage and all this crazy stuff. So that's a really tough way to go. Or you could sail there. And the way that everybody sailed there, they all went the same way. They came down along the western coast of Africa, and then let's go back. And then they'd come back up into India and China, right? So they'd make this journey. A couple of problems with this. Very long and it's very expensive. It took a long time to make this journey. And on the water, the weather is very unpredictable. You could all of a sudden have a storm come up out of nowhere and smash your entire fleet of ships to pieces. And as you came around the southern tip of South Africa, this is known as the Cape of Good Hope. And it's called that for a very good reason. You were hoping things were going to go well. You have two oceans here. You have the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean that merge here. So you've got two different currents that are kind of crashing together at this time. And that could cause all sorts of problems for your ship. It would just toss your ship around and you could get lost. Ships could get broken apart during that time. The weather down here can be very unpredictable and you could run into some very, 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 very bad weather. And then you have to make that return trip. So those were the two ways when Christopher Columbus comes along to get to India and China. Columbus wants to try something revolutionary and different. He wants to go west. Now remember, they've lost or forgotten all of this stuff from the Vikings about finding Greenland and Newfoundland. So they forgot about this huge giant landmass in the middle of the ocean here. In Columbus's mind, he can just sail west across the open ocean, and eventually he'll come out and be able to make it to India. That's the way he was thinking. Now, why didn't other Europeans do this, right? They certainly could have, but they always went around Africa. Here's why. It's not because they believed that the world was flat, right? The Greeks had figured out the world was round. The Romans knew the world was round. They knew, majority of educated people at that time knew the world was round. They were not going to sail off the edge of the earth. They knew that. The reason was this was scary out here. Most seafarers did not want to be within more than a day's trip to land. They liked to be able to see land as they're out in the ocean. Out here, it's very scary. There's no land out here. And you got to remember, this is a time when they still believed in the Kraken and all of these other mythological ocean creatures that were out there to destroy ships and stuff. They truly believed that, those stories. And so this was a scary idea to spend days or weeks in the water without seeing any land. So nobody ever did it. Columbus wants to give it a shot. So Columbus first goes to this newly created country of Spain. Spain is a brand spanking new baby country. Spain wants to compete with the big boys in Europe, England and France. And one of the ways to do that is to establish new trade routes. So he goes to Spain. He offers his services to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, tells them his plan. They think it's a crazy plan. Nobody wants to take that kind of risk and go west into all this open ocean. So they turn him down. So Columbus goes to France. And he tells the French what he wants to do, and the French go, "Oh, oui, oui, I don't think so. Thank you very much." And then he goes to England. England is intrigued, and they ask him, "Oh, Chip, Chip, cheerio. So you went to the French before us, is that correct?" And he goes, "Yeah, I did. I asked the French to fund this. Now, oh, tally ho. So tell us, what did the French say?" France and England don't like each other; they're always in competition. And Columbus says, "Well, the French turned me down." And the English go, "Ah, jolly good. So I don't think so. I think it's a bit of too much of a risk. Thank you, old chap." And they send him on his way. So now Columbus is dejected. He's been rejected by Spain. He's been rejected by France. He's been rejected by England. But he's got a new idea. Hey, what if I go back to Spain and I have a different sales tactic? So this time he goes back to Spain and he tells them, "Look, after I left here, I went to France. France is really interested. They're like on board. Then I went to the English. Well, the English really liked it because if the French liked it, then of course the English were going to like it." He said, "But I really wanted to come back to you because you, Spain, are the one I really want to sail for. And so I want to give you first shot at this." Spain thinks for a minute, Isabella and Ferdinand, they go, "Huh. So France and England are really interested in it." Because, "Oh, yeah. I mean, they're ready to go tomorrow. But Spain is the one I really want to sail for. So I want to give you first shot. I know you said no, but I want to come back and just make sure." So Spain figures, well, if England and France are that interested, maybe it's worth a shot. So immediately Spain agrees to fund his voyage because they don't want England and France to get even richer. So he's hired. All right. So there's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. They were king and queen of two different kingdoms. They got married and merged their kingdoms together, and they create Spain. Apparently, there's something very interesting going on up here. I don't know. There's a bird or something loose up in the ceiling, but everybody's looking up. I don't know. All right, so Isabella and Ferdinand want to make their new country of Spain just as powerful and just as important as France and England. So they hired Columbus to go out and establish new trade routes and bring them prestige and bring them riches and make them powerful. So they give Columbus a really cool name, right? I mean, the title is everything. If you can get a title, you're set. So they name him Admiral of the Ocean Seas, whatever that means. And they give him 3 ships for his voyage: the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. August 3rd, 1492, they sail the ocean blue, right? Columbus and his crew depart Spain and they head west into a lot of open water, which scared the bejesus out of all of these other sailors who were going with Columbus. They were not real happy about this. And after several weeks of just being in open water, the sailors on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria really begin to get nervous and begin to question the sanity of Columbus. They think Columbus is sending them on a suicide mission. And they begin talking about mutiny. They're going to kill and throw Columbus over the side of the ship so they can go back to Spain, because this is lunacy. They've never been in this much water for this long, this much open water for this long. So Columbus comes up with a plan to stop the mutiny from taking place. Columbus tells him, I've really been looking at the maps and I've been studying the stars, and I know we're really, really close. Any minute, we could see land off in the horizon. So Columbus says, I will pay a bunch of gold. I will give a reward to the very first person who can spot land. So now, instead of talking about mutiny and killing Columbus and taking control of the ships and going back to Spain, now, with this prospect of becoming rich, the crew members begin to spend their time looking for land. On August 12th, 1492, around 2 in the morning, there's a young deckhand. His name is Rodrigo. He's looking off in the distance, and he sees off in the distance, in the shine from the moon, land. And he goes running down into the lower decks of the ship to Columbus's room, and he knocks on the door. Columbus! I saw land! And Rodrigo is so excited because now he's going to collect his money, right? And Columbus opens up the door, and Columbus says, yeah, I know. I saw it hours ago. Sorry, Rodrigo, you're not the first one, but thanks. Ugh. The next morning, Columbus begins to sail around this new land that he's found. And as he's sailing around this land, all of these natives who live on the land have come out to look at these ships. And both are just as surprised as the other. And they're looking at each other. They don't know what to make of this. Columbus continues to sail around these land, and he's convinced he's found India, but he's found a new part of India that nobody's ever found, and he must be in the poor part of India, because all of these people on the land are all naked as a jaybird. They have no clothes on. And so Columbus thinks, well, I've never heard about naked people running around in India, so this must be a really, really poor part of India. And he sails around looking for the richer part of India, where the people are wearing clothes. And he doesn't find them, so he decides eventually to go on shore. And he names this new part of India, he believes, Salvador. It eventually turns out to be an island in the Bahamas that he's landed at. He continues further west and finds the island of Cuba, and then another island he calls Hispaniola, which today is present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And here we see a highly idealized painting of Columbus meeting the natives on these islands. Now, this is a obviously very biased, very idealized depiction. The natives are kneeling. You can see them coming to Columbus, and they're kneeling before the cross, and they're giving Columbus all these offerings that they have to him. Obviously, it's written. This is done by a European or Italian artist, depicting what they thought was happening. What really happened was much different. So Columbus is there to find spices or gold to send back to Spain. The problem is none of these islands in the Caribbean have very much of any of these. There's not a lot of gold there, and there's not a lot of spices there. So Columbus becomes convinced that the natives are holding out on him, that they're hiding the gold. And he calls them Indians because he believes that he's in India. So these are people that live in India, so they must be Indians. And that's where we get the term. So he becomes convinced that they're hiding gold from him. So he's going to have to force them to give up their gold. And he begins to enslave the Indians, the natives here, the American Indians. And he forces them to work in these mines that he has them dig out looking for gold. And he begins to torture the natives to turn over their gold. And he would do some horrific things. He'd cut off their noses and cut off their ears, cut off their hands, cut off their feet. He would cut off their genitals. He did these just awful, awful things. He would have them eaten alive by dogs and make the others watch in hopes of convincing them to turn over this gold that he thought they were hoarding, when in fact there was none there for them to have. Columbus makes a few more voyages. He goes back to Spain. He comes back over, and he makes a few more voyages looking for things that aren't there. He's looking for all these riches that Spain desperately wants, but they're not there. They're not there at all. To his dying day, Columbus believes he's found India. On his deathbed, Columbus makes a comment about finding an undiscovered part of India. The rest of Europe by now has figured out this is not even remotely close to India or Asia. This is a completely new landmass they never knew about. Columbus, because he just couldn't find what he was looking for, is eventually fired by Spain. Now, the aftermath of Columbus is that he leaves in his wake tens of thousands of dead natives as a result of torture, execution, and disease. The Europeans brought over a lot of communicable diseases that the Europeans probably didn't know they had. They had built up immunity to these diseases because they had been exposed to them for hundreds of years. So they had built up immunity to a lot of these diseases. These natives have never been exposed to any of these diseases. And as a result, they don't have any immunity to it. And it just wipes them out very rapidly. And neither the Indians or the Europeans really could figure out what was going on initially. Now, the Indians do give the Europeans a disease for which they had no immunity to, and it wipes out huge portions of huge pockets of populations in Europe. Indians give the Europeans a lot of STDs, a lot of sexually transmitted diseases that the Europeans never had any exposure to, and eventually kills a lot of Europeans. Spain sees a new opportunity for riches and power. They now know this is an entirely new landmass that nobody knew about. And they see an opportunity to become extraordinarily wealthy very, very quickly, which they will. The rest of Europe also begins to take notice of this new landmass and begins making explorations and claiming new land in this new territory, forever altering the course of history in this landmass. And we're done, Panthers. If you went back and took the notes or whatever on here, you didn't get them in class, make sure that you take a picture of your notes and send them to me so I can give you credit for taking notes today. And hold on to your notes because it's really, really important that we're going to continue to build on these notes from here on out. If you have any questions, you have any problems, make sure to let me know, contact me, and I will help you out. And until next time, you guys have a great day. Bye.